Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to the 400 Mini Show, an exploration of the built-in games for the 400 Mini retro gaming console, and onwards into the broader library of Atari 8-bit games. Today, we're going to look at two games from the built-in lineup, Centipede and Millipede. The reason I wanted to cover these together is because a lot of people conflate the two and wonder why you'd bother playing one when the other exists. I certainly used to feel this way, but having studied Atari games in quite a lot of depth for this YouTube channel over the past few years, I've come to discover that the two games, while superficially similar, do have notable differences from one another, and I figured the best way to show that off would be to look at both one after another. Centipede first hit arcades in 1980 and is probably best known today for being one of the first commercially successful video games with significant creative input from a female game designer, in this case Donna Bailey, who worked alongside Ed Logg to bring the game to market. It's also credited as one of the first video games to attract a significant female player base. This was something that Logg was aiming for by eschewing what was, at the time, assumed to be traditionally male-coded subject matter such as fighting or sports. Millipede followed a year later in 1982, this time without Bailey's involvement. The game was put together by Ed Logg and Mark Cherney, the latter of whom is probably best known today for playing a significant role in the design of several PlayStation branded systems. There were actually two versions of Centipede on Atari 8-bit. The most widespread version was a 1982 port by Dave Gautreaux, which attracts somewhat mixed opinions from modern commentators. And there's also a less common incarnation that appears to be a port of the somewhat different Atari 5200 version. Little is known about this latter version, save for the fact that it appeared on a few Atari compilations in the latter days of the company's active support of the 8-bit range. Millipede's Atari 8-bit port followed in 1984 and was the work of programmer Steve Crandall, graphic artist Gary Johnson and sound designer Brad Fuller. This is much more well regarded, and while adjustments have been made to fit the horizontally oriented TV display home players would have been enjoying the game on, it's regarded as remarkably true to the arcade original, albeit perhaps a little slower. We've got a lot of bug blasting to do today, so let's get on with it. Let's go play Centipede and Millipede. Okay, welcome back to the 400 Mini, where today we're taking a look at Centipede and Millipede. We're beginning with Centipede. In this version of the popular coin-op game, you must wield your bug blaster to clear the mushroom patch of enchanted bugs. Stop the centipede from reaching the bottom of the screen, clear mushrooms to give yourself more time, play alone or with a friend. Watch out for jumping spiders waiting at the sides. Let's check the controls, move and fire. And that's about it. Okay. Right, so what we have here is the earlier version of Centipede that is a bit more widespread and a bit more common. So a lot of people don't like this version very much, but let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. So Centipede, if you're unfamiliar, is a fairly straightforward shoot 'em up. Your job on each stage is simply to destroy the centipede. Whoops. And the mushrooms get in the way. You can destroy the mushrooms, but when you get below a certain number of mushrooms on the screen, those fleas start dropping down and creating more mushrooms, because as we all know, fleas create mushrooms. And when you lose a life, as you can see, any sort of half-eaten mushrooms or half-destroyed mushrooms are restored, and you get bonus points for each of those. Not very many bonus points, admittedly, but still bonus points. So, the original arcade version of Centipede used a trackball. And a lot of people swear that you can't play Centipede properly without a trackball. If I remember correctly, the Atari 8-bit version of this did support trackball controls. But of course that was dependent on you actually having a trackball, which relatively few people did. We actually did. And I remember playing a few games with trackball, and it is fun playing with the trackball. Particularly games like Missile Command and this. But for the most part, these games were written on the assumption that people would be playing with a joystick. Right, that thing moving across the screen and turning the mushrooms blue. I can't remember what it's supposed to be. But what it does is if the centipede hits one of those blue mushrooms, which is a poison mushroom, in fact, yeah, you'll see it there. It comes down the screen a lot more quickly than it would do otherwise. So you can take advantage of that to quickly clear out large quantities of centipede at a time, as you can see. Whoops. But it's often a good idea to try and get rid of those poison mushrooms as soon as possible. There's our extra life, complete with the authentic little jingle from the arcade version. Yeah, I don't think this is a bad version of Centipede at all, really. The only slight sticking point I have is that there is a slight tendency for the player sprite to get stuck on the mushrooms if you're in just the wrong position, which is a little bit frustrating. But in terms of presentation, it's fine. Centipede was never a looker. It's got all the important gameplay elements. The mushroom poisoning dudes seem to come up a lot more frequently than they do in the arcade version. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. It's fine. It does the job, which is provide the experience of playing Centipede at home. The movement of the Centipede perhaps isn't quite as smooth as it could be. You may recall a while back we looked at a disc from the Page 6 public domain library, which had a machine code game called Millipede on it that was praised for its very smooth sprite animation, particularly on the Centipede coming down the screen. Whereas what we've got here is the Centipede isn't actually a sprite at all, it's moving by character. So it's basically redefined characters from the Atari's character set, designed to look like a centipede, and then it's moving by character, which is why it has that sort of slightly jittery movement. But that's fine, that was a perfectly common technique and a perfectly valid technique for moving particularly large objects around the screen. Because the Atari had hardware sprites, but only 4 of them. Technically 4 player sprites and 4 missile sprites. And you could combine the 4 missile sprites into a 5th player sprite if you wanted to. So, what I think we've got here is we've got at least 1 sprite being used on the player in this. Probably 2, because hardware sprites for the Atari were just 1 colour. And we've actually got 2 colours on the player sprite here, which usually suggests that it's 2 sprites overlaid on top of each other. We've got a 3rd sprite for the spider, possibly a 4th sprite for the fleas, and possibly a 4th sprite for the mushroom poisoning thing. Of course, it's entirely possible that some of these things are being done in software as well, by sort of moving chunks of the screen around. Because yeah, there, if you look, we had the spider, we had the mushroom poisoning thing, and we had the flea all on screen at the same time. So that's more than the usual 4 sprites. And the player's bullet, of course, as well. So yeah, this is a perfectly competent version of Centipede, and would have been absolutely perfectly acceptable at the time it was released. I have seen far worse versions of Centipede. I've seen better versions of Centipede as well, but, you know, this isn't bad. There's a few commenters on Atari Mania who I think have been a little bit harsh on this version. But, you know, it's just your opinion, man, and all that. We've got a slight issue in the corner here. There we go. Yeah, you'll also notice if you take too long to destroy the centipede, it will start... It will start summoning more segments of itself as well. Oh, and yes, if it wasn't already clear as well, when you destroy a segment of centipede, it turns into a mushroom. I might have found a winning strategy here. I'm just going to stay here. Oh, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. I'm staying right here. There we go. Look at that. This is how you do it. You funnel them down and you take them out. Lovely stuff. I don't think I've ever finished so many levels of Centipede. Now, how long can I keep this up is the question. What is... That's going to happen. The old spider. Get out of here. Oh! It feels a lot harder to avoid the spider in this game. It feels a bit more unpredictable. Anyway, that is Centipede. Hopefully that's pretty clear what that's all about. It's fairly self-explanatory. So let's go back to the menu. And let's go to Millipede. In this sequel to Centipede, you play as the Archer. You must stop enchanted bugs from taking over your mushroom patch. Stop the Millipede from reaching the bottom of the screen alone or with a friend. Don't let the Millipede touch poisonous mushrooms and score as many points as you can. Again, controls are identical to Centipede. But let's play. We have a fancy title screen this time around. And slightly more elaborate graphics. Alright, let's begin. Now, one interesting thing in Millipede is that you can choose your starting score. Up to a maximum of 60,000. And that determines the difficulty of the game at the start. Because it gets more difficult as you score more points. But it also makes it easier to obtain some extra lives. So we'll start with 0 for now. Just go basically from the beginning. And you'll immediately see some differences. First of all, it starts off a lot slower than Centipede does. Particularly the spider. We also have some other elements to the gameplay, such as those DDT bits that you can shoot. Also, every so often you have this wave of things flying down the screen, which is good for getting some bonus points. You've got an extra life already. And another extra life. One thing you quickly come to understand about Millipede is it may not look it right now. It may not look it right now. But Millipede's main distinguishing feature over Centipede is it has a lot more going on than Centipede. It's a lot faster, it's a lot more frantic. There are a lot more things happening simultaneously. So yes, it's starting pretty easily at the moment. But we're already seeing the speed starting to increase a little bit at a time, nice and gradually. And you can already see there's a lot more things on screen at once. And then you have these little interludes. These little interludes with the swarms of things flying down the screen, giving you the opportunity to earn a whole mess of bonus points. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen your next extra life. The number of points you need to score to get that next extra life is always recorded at the bottom of the screen for quick and easy reference as well. So yeah, you can probably see that our score is much higher than it was in Centipede as well. Because there's a lot more going on, there's a lot more things to shoot, there's a lot more opportunities of scoring points. So your average score in a game of Millipede will generally be a lot higher than in a game of Centipede that lasts an equivalent amount of time. We've got 2 spiders at once to deal with. Yes, they're moving more slowly, but it's still quite easy to get distracted by what's going on. You need to pay attention to stuff like that ladybug that appears and crawls along the bottom of the screen and then moves upwards to try and get you. We've got 3 spiders now. We're developing a nice little corridor there, like we did in Centipede. And you'll see that shooting certain types of enemies causes the screen to scroll slightly as well, which is interesting, because that sort of shifts the layout around a bit and makes it a little bit less likely that we'll get into situations like we did in Centipede with that long corridor. But equally, it is possible to create situations like that as well. So many extra lives. Yeah, so if you get to grip with Millipede's additional mechanics, one game of it can probably last a lot longer than a typical game of Centipede. As is probably already very apparent. Not sure if that's slowdown or deliberate sort of pacing that we've got there. Whoops! But yes, we're probably on track to get over 100,000 points at this rate. Let's see if we can reach that milestone. $1,200 points for defeating a spider up close. There it is, 100,000 points. Still got 6 extra lives, still going strong. Yeah, your mileage may vary when it comes to the arcade versions, but when it comes to the Atari 8-bit versions, this game is a lot more fun than Centipede. I think it's got better pacing, there's more to it. It's nicely balanced. The way that it starts off quite slowly is a really good idea, because it kind of lets newcomers get to grips with things before ramping up the intensity. And to be honest, with the number of things that are going on simultaneously, it's actually quite welcome that it's a bit slower, because otherwise it would be completely overwhelming. But yeah, we're definitely on... No, no! I'm going to say, we're definitely on track for a very nice score here. It's just how long can I survive beyond this point. So I never played this version of Millipede back in the day, but we had a copy of the Atari ST version, which was very good. Oh dear. Yeah, the Atari ST version of Millipede is very good. And it's a game that my mother used to really enjoy playing. She used to joke that any time the Davison men became a bit much for her, because she lived with me, my dad, and my brother. So three blokes to one woman. She used to joke that any time we became a bit much for her, she'd go and just have a quick blast on Millipede and imagine that she was blowing us away, which is a perfectly healthy thing to do. You can channel your rage and frustration into something that is non-harmful, then why not do that? If it helps you deal with the stresses of living with me, my brother, and my father. But yeah, this is good. I'm enjoying this. Now, obviously the balance is quite different to the arcade. 4 spiders! Obviously the balance is very different to the arcade game, because the arcade game would have been wanting a decent player turnover. So it had a much less gradual difficulty curve than this does. But for a home game, where you want to be sitting down and playing a game for a while, you want to feel like you're earning big scores and achieving great things, then yeah, this is great. This is one thing that I found sort of through modern retro gaming, is that back in the day I was always a little envious of arcade games, because very few home ports of arcade games completely stacked up to their arcade counterparts. But these days I tend to find I actually prefer playing the home versions of arcade games. I prefer playing the ports, because they are typically balanced to be more fun for a player in the home. Whereas if you emulate an arcade game, or buy a version of an arcade game on, say, the Arcade Archive series or something like that, you're getting that original arcade experience, which is not necessarily balanced to be fun. It's balanced to extract money from people's pockets. Oh, look at the speed of them now. Getting a little scary. Very well though. I'm happy with this score. Very happy with this score. No! Is that it? That's all over, isn't it? It's all over. Game over. 175,444 points. And you see, once you've attained a particular milestone of 10,000 points, you can then start at that score and continue to try and beat yourself. Continuing to get those extra lives every 10,000 points. So, Millipede is actually quite an early example of sort of an incremental game where you're trying to get that score as high as possible by starting at the previous milestone that you reached and then working your way onwards, trying to push it higher and higher and higher as the game gets harder and harder and faster and faster. Yeah, that's great. That's a really good version of Millipede, actually. I wasn't super familiar with the Atari 8-bit version beforehand, but that's a lot of fun. Better than the version of Centipede we've got here. The version of Centipede here has some value, but I think that version of Millipede, specifically this version, rather than the arcade version, is really nicely balanced for home play. It's really nicely balanced to give you a play session that is of a satisfying length without being too long, and allowing you to attain some really impressive scores. So yeah, I'd encourage you to try both of those and see what you think and see the differences between the two of them. And hopefully playing both of them in this one video today has helped to highlight what the differences between Centipede and Millipede are. Because they might not sound like much when someone just explains them to you, But hopefully you could see with the amount of stuff that was going on at one time in that game of Millipede by the end there, that is the distinguishing feature between the two games. Centipede just gets faster and a little bit more difficult. Millipede gets exponentially more complex as you progress, with lots and lots of things to pay attention to at once. Yeah, a lot of fun. Alright, we'll leave that there for today. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.